People that have died and been brought back, what did you see and feel? Not much. Kinda just felt like I time traveled. I was run over by a truck and bled to death on the side of the road and had to be revived. One moment I was looking behind me and saw the truck right before it hit me, thought what the fuck? Then I just remember a massive force, and I was knocked out when my head hit the ground. Then I was in an ambulance with blood everywhere, and someone trying to talk to me after feeling a huge electric shock. Then I lost consciousness again after a moment. Then I was in a hospital, and had just woken up from emergency surgery to save my life. No bright light. No dreams. No visions. If I'd have died, I would have just ceased to exist. Nothing but calm relaxation. Woke up with a half-beard sore and down 15 pounds. Mountain bike accident with massive head trauma. Almost 7 years ago. I didn't remember the next 2 months. Fully recovered. Edit, wow. This blew up. Thanks for the love, Reddit. Wear helmets. I was wearing a helmet, not full face. Impact point was between the eyebrows. Helmet saved my life. Split helmet in half and I do still have a small scar and the smashed helmet. I picked the song for the video. Quiet Riot fit the on-screen action perfectly. I am in my mid-40s now, late 30s at the time of the bike crash. Broke both wrists and a few bones in one hand. Search and rescue and my brothers-in-law found me around 6 to 8 hours after the crash in the middle of the night. I have no memory of the bike ride, crash, rescue or the week at the hospital. But I found some video about a year later. I was back to work 2 months later as a senior financial analyst, desk job. Mostly recovered. And I still didn't have much memory of the 2 months prior. Had to do the most work on mental tasks. For example, the doc would show a picture of a whale and ask me what it was. And my mind told me whale, but I could not communicate that word. I'd say, oh yeah, it's a fish and big, and they eat little fish, lots of different kinds of them. And doc would say, what is it? Took me 4 to 6 months to be able to answer that. It was 2 years before I fully recovered. MT beers, some technical talk. I ride a 29-inch hardtail with stock front suspension. I enjoy cross-country trails, not downhill technical rides or any of the jumping. For the bike crash, I was borrowing my bro's 26-inch full suspension that was super small and had a springy suspension front and rear, which threw me over the handlebars. Helmet had MIPS. Kudos to the YouTube comments. Also wear helmets. I had a cardiac arrest and no pulse for 13 minutes. I was kept alive with CPR and eventually shocked back to life with a defibrillator. I woke up several times but kept slipping unconscious. There was nothing there. Just black blank spaces in time that were very short. A lady did the CPR for 40 minutes and it went by in a second. But I did have a feeling of not wanting to die or leave my life. Comment, 40 minutes, holy shit. I can't even keep up chest compressions for 5 minutes without having to tap in someone else. That lady is a goat. I had a cardiac arrest and no pulse for 13 minutes. I was kept alive with CPR and eventually shocked back to life with a defibrillator. I woke up several times but kept slipping unconscious. There was nothing there. Just black blank spaces in time that were very short. A lady did the CPR for 40 minutes and it went by in a second. But I did have a feeling of not wanting to die or leave my life. Comment, 40 minutes, holy shit. I can't even keep up chest compressions for 5 minutes without having to tap in someone else. That lady is a goat. I had a saddle pulmonary embolism. The doctor afterwards told me it was the biggest clot he'd ever seen. I can't say for sure, but I know when it happened. In the moments leading up to it, I heard a voice say, "Sit down on the chair." As soon as I did, I was out. I can't describe it other than saying it felt like my body was lifting into the air. I felt simultaneously heavy and super light at the same time. I woke up covered in cold sweat. I spent a month in ICU after that. Nothing. At one point, I was riding my bike, the next I felt intense pressure on my back and neck and then darkness. I woke up in the emergency room and doctors say that a van ran over my chest and neck and my heart had stopped and I was dead for 3 minutes. Literally nothing happened while I was dead. I've been knocked out and had weird dreams while I was knocked out every time, but this was just nothing and then I'm back. As if I had a dreamless sleep. Nothing. I was just gone. Not even blackness. Just was nothing. I overdosed on fentanyl-laced cocaine. Woke up staring at the ceiling with firefighters surrounding me who had administered 4 shots of Narcan. I had a respiratory-induced cardiac arrest, not sure how long I was out. Didn't know what the fuck was going on when I came to, but passed out again shortly after being strapped in and carried down the stairs to the ambulance. Woke up later in the hospital to a gay nurse giving me a whole lot of sass, which I deserved, for being an idiot and almost dying. That was my second overdose. First time I was in the hospital getting dialysis for kidney failure for the same dumb shit. I don't do drugs anymore. Fuck that life. A few years ago my heart hit 180 BPM and would not go down. A trip to the ER in NYC resulted in a dozen young learning doctors standing around as a couple of seasoned vets decided to give me a shot of adenosine. Technically, I had an A flutter. This drug stops your heart for several seconds in a controlled environment and is intended to restart the heart with the correct beat. They stood by with paddles and gave the shot, saying this may not feel comfortable. I was conscious as my heart stopped. I could hear people around me and feel tears fall down my face. The best way to explain the next few seconds was a wave of impending doom, but that is mild. It was a huge wave. A huge rush. A powerful enveloping feeling. I was quite awake, although technically flatlining. I could only say that whatever was about to happen to me was not going to be good. No lights, no angels. Just oh shit. Like you veered off the center lane at 80 miles per hour and you're 5 feet from the front of a Mack truck. And then I woke up, in all it was about 10 seconds but an eternity. The drug didn't work. Spent the weekend in hospital and ended up having an ablation. All good. When I was dead, it was black. I didn't hear, see, or smell anything. It might be because I was only dead for such a short time. When they restarted my heart, I felt a pull on the center of my chest and it was like I was literally ripped out of the dark. Failed suicide attempt around age 13. Once I passed the point of no return, all the pain and depression, fueled by anger and a desire to kill myself, I was overcome by this calm. I saw myself as I floated over my body. Then I sort of flipped over and was going down this tunnel of light. At the end was some kind of barrier like a film. I remember touching this film and I knew I had touched some kind of all-encompassing omnipotence. As I became aware of it, I sort of became it, and a part of it at the same time. I suddenly knew everything, and for a nerd like me, that was all I ever wanted. The concept of all-knowing is hard to recall, but I remembered 2 things. The first is when you know everything, you lose the concept of what a question is. You don't even ask questions, you just know the exact same moment because there is no preface to knowledge anymore. Knowledge is not something you seek, you are the knowledge. Second, in this state, I knew I had to go back and keep living. I also knew that I would not understand when I woke up alive why I should keep living. But I knew when I carried back to my body the feeling that I had to keep living even if I did not understand why yet. Like I once understood, but what I understood would get lost in the translation. So all I could do was know. At one point, it made sense and I agreed to it. If that makes any sense. Waking up, I felt so small, like my mind could not fit in this teeny tiny mortal coil. And I was so distraught at being alive, I wailed and mourned that I was forced to endure my utter contempt at self and environmental misery. My life got better, but sometimes I feel like death is this place in space and time where the ultimate safety and comfort dwells. And I do not fear death because it's going to be okay. Like, more okay than any okay we know as blobs of walking meat. Okay, I'm a Christian. And I have no way to prove this happened to me. But this is my story. I was partying super hard one night. I was getting way stupid. My friend, Eric, brings in this flower he told me about. I do the name correctly, but I believe it was like daylily or trumpet lily. Anyways, you're only supposed to eat one of the 3 petals on the flower. 1 gets you high, 2 puts you in a coma, 3 kills you. I thought he was fucking around with me, so I ate the whole thing, root and all. I black out. I wake up in a room that reminds me of an interrogation room. Completely blank walls. No exits or windows, just a room with a table. There sits across from me 3 people talking among themselves in whispers. I cannot see their faces because the light isn't bright enough. They're saying things like he shouldn't be here and he isn't ready. The one in the middle just nods and listens. He shifts a little bit and tells me that they're going to send me back. I wake up in the hospital a few days later. My family is there. My mom's crying. I find out Eric called the ambulance and I died for 10 seconds on the ride over. I'm not sure if this is relevant at all, but you people be the judge. I was very depressed at one point, and one night I'm pretty sure I could slip away from life that night, lying on my bed. It was an intuitive feeling and I felt this sensation all over my body. It was tingling and my head felt like exploding and I felt like sleeping despite my ear drumming and thumping like mad. Like I could actually leave my body. I've already made peace with death and for what reason life was going crazy, and I thought that suicide was something I was supposed to do. It didn't seem as a mere act of running away at that time, but as something heroic. Supposedly an act of courage and loving myself. But then a surge of optimism broke through me. I was gambling on the little chance of an interesting tomorrow and the sensation then dissipate, and here I am. Glad I didn't leave. I'm still not sure if it was a near-death experience, but here's what I remember. At the time, I was climbing a mountain in Japan in January, planning to tent for the night near the peak, at around 2700 m. I pitched my tent at 5 p.m. and immediately dove into my sleeping bag, as the temperature inside the tent was around -13°C, cold enough to freeze the water vapor from your breath and make it snow in your tent. Even inside the bag, it was still very cold. I finally fell asleep at 6 p.m. or so, and remember waking up in a low, long wooden hall, lying on a thin mattress, with many other mattresses around me. There were a few other people in the hall, mostly talking in low voices among themselves. I felt a sense of relief and peace. I got up and walked over to one of the windows. I could see another wooden building nearby, with large open windows, and people sitting inside, laughing and eating. I went back to my mattress, and one of the other people came over to me and asked where I'd come from. When I said I wasn't sure, he replied that I must be from section? A number, can't remember exactly what, and I'd probably come too early. I lay back down on the mattress, and next thing I knew I was back in my tent, staring up into the darkness, with the cold gnawing at my feet again. I felt overwhelmed with disappointment. I checked my watch, and found that it had actually only been about an hour since I fell asleep, even though it felt like nearly the whole night had passed. Doctors, nurses, EMTs, etc., what's the most shocking thing you've seen after thinking nothing could surprise me anymore? I think I've mentioned this one in the past. Elderly guy came in the middle of winter. Legs were frozen to mid-thigh. And I mean truly, ice block frozen. At the same time he had a bunch of serious burns all over his torso. His gas had been cut off in the middle of winter, technically illegal if the gas company has documentation of an elderly or handicapped person in the home. He had been trying to keep warm with an incandescent light bulb. He kept falling asleep and the bulb would fall on him, walking him up and causing small, fairly deep burns. He had immediate lower extremity amputations, rewarming, and went to the burn unit. He ended up dying within a few days. The level of suffering he must have gone through is immense. To this day, it is one of the saddest, most preventable deaths I've ever seen. ERRN here. The baby born en route coming from 4 hours north. Preemie at 29 weeks, no esophagus, no soft palate, no genitals, severely deformed spine and extremities, only one leg, not breathing on their own, and literally none of the organs developed anywhere close to functionally. Mom had a long history of substance abuse, including throughout the pregnancy. No prenatal care, despite her community trying extremely hard. Other children already apprehended. Oh, and mom was hemorrhaging. Big time. Not necessarily the most shocking, but it definitely sticks with me. One of the paramedics that brought them was absolutely distraught. Edit to add, mom ended up recovering with no complications. Baby was kept alive for 7 hours before mom finally withdrew care and passed peacefully in her arms. I've answered this before, so here it is again. Spoiler alert for triggered and squeamish, don't read further, skip to the end. Day off on vacation with another paramedic. On the highway, saw an accident happening in the distance. We were in the funnel to get by. An OPD, fire, or EMS. On scene, and it was bad. So we stopped to help. This was early days of cell phones, but we had one and called it in. I should have known by the smell what was going on when I opened my car door. Diesel, body parts, exhaust. I will never forget that smell. Internal organs have their own special smell, and if lavender was in that mix, lavender would repulse me for the rest of my life. DPS report said a pickup truck at 80 miles per hour blew a tire and went into oncoming lanes and hit an 18-wheeler at the pinch point, driving the 18-wheeler into the lanes of traffic the first truck originated from. This caused a head-on collision with a family car at about 120 miles per hour combined impact, and the impacts from the vehicles that couldn't stop drove the family car under the cab of the 18-wheeler. The vehicles were so badly mangled you couldn't tell it was a pickup. Triage is a system where you look at the injuries and decide who is going to get help. You look at dead or dying and realize you can't help them and move to someone else who is dying, but you can save, and you help them. Had to do that. 5 fatalities, pickup truck driver was in pieces, literally. 18-wheeler driver had to be life-flighty to trauma. 3 others transported to ER with serious but not life-threatening injuries. Hour and a half later we were still trying to get the cab off the family car, with a high crane type wrecker, even though I had already given up hope of anybody being alive. Relatives of the family car had passed the accident but didn't see the car, as it was crushed under the cab of the 18-wheeler and was unrecognizable, returned to the scene when their loved ones they were behind weren't at home. DPS, fire, EMS and wreckers had been on scene for a while. My friend and I had taken a backseat to rescue efforts by this time, and had cleaned up and were leaving as we would only be in the way at this point, when the family approached us to ask about the details. The rescue effort moved into high gear when I told the captain that the possible occupants of the family car was a mother, father, grandmother, and 1-day-old infant that had just been released from the hospital a few hours before. They were the other 4 fatalities. Ton of bricks. Just as vivid as the day it happened. A patient's insurance company refused to pay for a PET scan. When the patient said they would pay for their own PET scan out of pocket, the insurance company said they would refuse to pay for any treatment, testing, or further workup based on evidence from the PET scan, if she paid for it herself. It was the most petty, bullshit, evil thing I've seen insurance do in a long time, and I see them do petty bullshit every day. Edit, it was Martin's Point Insurance. This guy kept coming to my unit because he was aspirating on something. He had a tracheostomy and a feeding tube in his stomach, so we were confused why he was being admitted every few weeks for aspiration if he wasn't consuming food orally. We eventually learned that his sister/wife, yes, had been pouring whiskey down his trach. To top it off, he groped or tried to grope every female nurse and tech that had him. 20-year medic. It's actually really hard to say what's the most shocking, but I once had a guy on hallucinogens completely remove all the tissue from his left forearm. Took it clear down to the radius and ulna. Dude was just chilling like everything was normal. It was crazy and definitely goes on the list. XEMT here. I always thought babies took time to be born. Well, that's not always the case. I was helping a woman who wasn't English speaking. She was very pregnant, and we kept trying to tell her to calm down, to breathe, but she was just screaming, and in a blink a baby popped out into her sweatpants. We cut off her blue sweatpants and there was a baby girl. Just like that. It just popped out. Comment, I had a friend that was due for her 3rd baby. In the ER getting assessed, while laying on her exam table, she said, I think I'm going to sneeze." She sneezed and out popped the baby. Psychiatrist here. Had a 6-year-old child with behavioral problems have a breakthrough with his therapist that he feels unloved and needs more affection from his mom. The very next day in his appointment with me, I tell his mother this. He looks at her, and she replies with okay and goes back to playing on her phone. As a father, that broke my heart into a million little pieces. I've seen murderers, psychopaths, even interviewed serial killers and seen the dregs of humanity. But a mother ignoring her child's cry for affection in front of me? This is how we create monsters. Doctor here. I once had a psychotic patient jump in front of a lorry, pretty much broke every rib on his right side and collapsed his lung. Here's the thing, he didn't die and actually managed to walk home, where he then sawed off both of his own feet and partially his right hand. Only found because the neighbor found one of the feet in his garden. Never underestimate what someone will do in extremes of mental health. Worked in a NICU. Woman had a very premature baby at home, like 25 to 26 weeks gestation. She and her partner decided to put the baby in a tube sock, and then in a shoebox to bring it to the hospital. But they got hungry and went through a McDonald's drive-thru with said very tiny baby in his sock box. It wasn't so much that they did the drive-thru, but that they told everyone about it and didn't think it was an interesting choice. Kid turned out reasonably okay. Mental health crisis worker. L worked for a lockdown psych unit with a heavy SVP, sexually violent predator, and just an all-around scary population of men. On this particular day, it was all female staff with the exception of one small man, and we are all tiny people. Management sucked and poorly/inadequately staffed all the time. We had an SVPM/32.6, 375 pounds. This man was a mountain who liked to hit his head on the wall until he had large open wounds on his face/forehead. He loved seeing blood, playing in it, drinking it, collecting it, masturbating with it. It didn't matter where the blood came from or how he got it. It was just endless fun for him. The day prior, he had hit his head in his cell and needed to get his head stapled shut, and from there sent to our facility for mental health treatment. We had him on a 1-to-1, he had his back turned away from staff and used a psych pen to help dig out the staples. It quickly became apparent what he was doing, and my co-worker hit the alarm, and the rest of us came running. Nursing saw and ran back to the station to get our lights out shot. The patient had half of them out and used his fingers to pull the wound apart to get the rest of the staples out. Once he realized he could put his finger in, he just started shoving his fingers deeper in the wound and trying to pull down in the wound, and then hit his head on the wall. Blood is splattered everywhere. Like, there was so much blood. It was like watching a real-life horror movie. Anyway, he turns to us with a soulless stare, flat effect, and drenched in blood. He says, "Your turn." He turns and looks at me and launches towards me, and I take off running. He's laughing like a goddamn hyena, saying, "Gotcha, it's just prank," and then proceeds to sit down and play in the blood like he was in a splash pool. He was given a night-night shot and trip to the ED. Men, what's a cheat code you discovered in marriage that actually works? Verbally acknowledging each other's contributions to the household. Thanks for cleaning up after dinner, it looks great. Thanks for taking the kids to soccer practice. Thanks for grabbing groceries, this is my favorite cheese. So on and so forth. By acknowledging each other's day-to-day, and sometimes mundane, contributions, it builds appreciation and prevents animosity. It also prevents certain tasks from being assigned to a person with the expectation that it's theirs forever and that's just how it is. When I feel like my wife is feeling a little down, or when I feel like we're not connecting emotionally, I will ask her about something she is passionate about and just get her talking. And I will ask questions that cannot be answered with a yes or no. She will go from sitting back with her arms folded to leaning forward, talking excitedly. Often, people feel closer to someone simply by talking to that person and being heard. And everyone feels good talking about their favorite things. Also, if you have something difficult to talk about, wait until they are in a good mood. Comment, my husband does this and it immediately takes me from cup empty to cup full. It's a great way to make your partner feel seen while also engaging them and distracting them from what's putting them in a bad mood. Keep a note on your phone for gift ideas. When she points out something she likes or wants to do, write it down in the note or snap a pic and insert it. See something you think she'd like? Write it down. Also, keep her clothing and shoe sizes in the note as well. Also, Google mental load and learn about the imbalances that tend to occur. Take more of it on. Comment, absolutely agree. I have a favorites list I keep on my phone. Anytime she says something is her favorite, big or small, it gets added. Favorite type of coffee, favorite flower, favorite treat, favorite orders from restaurants. I can remember the big common ones, but it's nice to be able to just pick something random up and know she will like it. Relationships aren't a zero-sum game. The only way to win is when you win together, so approach all disagreements with that approach. Comment, I read, it's not you versus your spouse, it's the two of you versus the problem, and it really changed so much of my perspective. The idea that we are a team versus everything else in life really helped me re-evaluate how I can be a better team player. Support my teammates. Take the viewpoint that we need to work together to solve problem. Along with the obvious, make sure you're doing your share of the household duties, communicating your appreciation of what your partner does. E.g., whenever my wife returns from something like getting groceries, I go out to the car to help bring everything in, and make sure I verbally let her know that I appreciate what she just did for our family. Comment, yes, being polite and appreciative covers many irritations. I do this with my employees and my partner. Especially if it's a common task. Thank you for getting the trash. Thank you for cleaning the bathroom. My partner always opens the door for me. I make sure that I always thank him. We've been together 23 years. Pick the right person. Be super critical during the courting phase. Ask the tough questions and make sure you're aligned. But once you decided to commit, that critical switch needs to flip and you need to be their biggest cheerleader. So many couples do it the other way, lovey-dovey during the courting phase and then start getting critical after they commit. Be each other's biggest fan. No shit talking about the other to anyone, ever. When you are always looking out for and supporting each other, that creates a strong team. Comment, I had to learn this the hard way. I already hated people talking shit behind each other's backs, but my mom raised me to consider blowing off steam as something else entirely. I had been really close with my cousin, and coffee at her place often turned into a bitch fest when I was trying to figure out how to handle an issue between my husband and I. And the bitch fest occasionally turned into flat-out name-calling. This did not help me with any problems. In fact, I would get into a negative headspace and it would make things worse. I didn't realize how fucking awful it was until she started repeating some of the things I said about my husband outside of the blowing off steam sessions. I was pissed at her until I realized that was just a cover because I was so embarrassed about what I did. My skin still tries to crawl off when I think about it, and it was 20 years ago. I never did it again. I explained to her that it needed to stop. I apologized to my husband. It was hard. But I saw the benefits almost immediately. I would talk to him about problems instead of letting them build. I had more respect for him and felt our relationship was something worthy of protection. I had to back off the close relationship with my cousin, as she really enjoyed drama and without me providing that she had no use for me beyond trying to shitstir. You never get yelled at while vacuuming. My father always told me that most married murder victims were killed by their spouse, but never while doing the dishes. Just because flowers. Not because you're sorry, or some holiday, just because. They always mean more to you so when there isn't a reason. Dude, here. I make the bacon. Literally. I fry up enough pretty bacon so that she can steal a couple of strips and I can yell "Get out of my kitchen," before I put everything else on the plate for breakfast. She's hard as nails the rest of the time, but the wife giggles and runs off like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar when I'm making the sides for the pancakes and blueberry waffles, made from scratch, mind you. Don't think of it as a 50-50 sort of relationship. You're half and my half. Think of it as 100% and 100%, each partner giving the other their all without expectation of equal return. Comment: to me it's always been like it's not always 50 to 50. Sometimes it's 80 to 20, sometimes it's 40 to 60, sometimes it's 10 to 90, etc. Relationships fluctuate and efforts shift depending on need, but it should always be efforts in an attempt to return to equilibrium. If one partner is always doing more and the other less, it's not going to work out. During pregnancy and the first few months after childbirth, I always hear men say, "There isn't much for me to do with the kid, it's all her." My cheat code is that SHE is your responsibility during that time. Every time her belly itches, you put lotion on, you get up and get her snacks, you rub her feet, you lift her belly up to release pressure on her back, you buy her comfortable clothes. When the baby is born, yes, she has to wake up and breastfeed, but you burp the baby, you change the diapers when you can. I did all of this shit while being active duty military, so it drives me up a wall when fathers and husbands make an excuse that they have to work so they can't help out. Be an active parent and an active partner. Suddenly, you'll find yourself getting laid more too without begging. It's like genuinely caring is attractive or something. Comment: all of this. Take care of your wife. Take care of your baby. Change diapers. Rock your kid for as long as it takes until they go back to sleep. If I hear a father say he's never changed a diaper, I assume he's a shitty father and shitty husband. When my wife gets home and wants to talk about work or about a friend or withy, I ask support or suggestion. Changed my life. My wife de-stresses after work by talking about her day. When we were dating, my impulse would be to solve whatever problem she had, which she didn't want. Years together and many fights later, we've both learned to just ask what the other needs, and we both love each other, so we're happy to provide it. Being kind is better than being right. Don't be defensive, it's okay to be wrong. Do not take your complaints about that person outside of the marriage just to vent or gossip. I'm not talking about enabling abusive isolation. I'm talking about the stress and annoyance that can come WJTH daily living in regards to your spouse and longing to vent. I might say that finances, schedule, time, etc. are really stressful and complain to family or my friends about that. Complaining about circumstances, not my spouse. But I don't talk about my husband for the sake of venting or gossip or tear him down in conversations to other people. If I needed true assistance, I'd find a therapist. I find allowing yourself to wallow in gossip and disrespect to your spouse quickly colors your view and other people's view of them, and you can't easily get that respect back. If my husband does something I view as foolish, I address it with him. We have been married almost 20 years, and mutual respect and admiration are very important in our marriage. Burr said it best in his last special. Once a month, do something you would never do. Do a date night, go on a picnic, watch The Notebook or some other chick flick. Once a month should keep them happy unless you have an unusually needy gal. Also, do not forget anniversaries and birthdays. Get presents for all the present holidays. Try to find some stuff she likes and get her stuff related to that. Good luck! Doctors of Reddit, what is the most unethical thing you have done or you have heard of a fellow doctor doing involving a patient? It's gotta be Robert Courtney. He diluted cancer chemotherapy drugs for years to make profit. Countless deaths, countless needless treatments, countless cancer study data rendered useless. By one man. My best friend's mother, Rula, is from Lebanon. When Rula was a young girl, she got pretty badly injured and went to the hospital. The doctor then proceeded to tell Rula's mother that she had passed away due to the injuries. She did not believe her and soon discovered Rula locked in a closet, waiting to presumably be sold into slavery. My roommate in dental school was a medical student. There was some big scandal at the hospital he was doing a rotation at because an anesthesiologist left the OR with the nurse anesthetist and left the patient alone. Something went wrong and the patient passed away on the table. Where were the two of them? Getting down in a nearby unused room thinking that nothing could happen in just a few minutes. It was in the news here, but there was a surgeon in Birmingham, I think, who diathermed, essentially burnt, his initials onto patients' livers. My colleague worked with him and saw him do this. I personally haven't seen much that's too bad. There are a lot of pretty dark jokes in the doctor's office, but nothing potentially damaging. A nurse did once offer to give me unprescribed flucloxacillin for a skin infection, but I politely refused. I'm a general surgery resident. We had a patient that had been on our service for about a year. Older fellow, very sick. Every now and then, he would go into respiratory distress, get intubated, or BiPAP, for a bit, always would bounce back to his baseline of 8 out of 10 sick. Everyone called him the Rock. But not in a cool, do you smell what the Rock is cooking way. In a boring sick person that sits their way. Well, he had always been a full code. That means that in case of dying, we do everything we can to keep him alive. After a long time of being inpatient, my attending was sick of him and made him a DNR/I, which means let him pass if he starts to struggle. He didn't want this, but they got away with it, saying that he did not have capacity, and he was decently with it, but I can see that argument. So talks with the family started, and they specifically stated that they wanted full code. My attending didn't agree and decided to call them to confirm. But we think he purposefully called the wrong number many times and eventually decided for himself that he was DNR/I. 2 days later, the guy went into RESP distress and died. I came to rounds the next morning to 2 attendings yelling and screaming about the right thing to do. Maybe I feel that it's better that he passed as well. But his family's wishes were ignored and purposefully evaded. I could never go against someone's wishes. I once knew an OB who didn't like to work after about 5 p.m., so at the end of office hours, if they had someone in labor, they would swing by labor and delivery and find a reason to do a C-section on them. Sometimes they blamed the baby's heart rate tracing, justified or not, but the classic one would be that they would check the patient's cervix and lie about how dilated it was, so it seemed as if labor wasn't progressing rapidly enough, and say, "I just don't think this is going to work, cut her, and be home for dinner." Now in OB we love TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, and one of the real indications for cesarean is CPD, cephalopelvic disproportion, which is where the baby's head is too big for the pelvis. But for this particular doc, we always said that they cut patients for CPD, cesarean, prior to dinner. Edit: no, I didn't report this doc because it's not possible to report someone for a subjective judgment call. As for this doc not being allowed to practice anymore, a hospital can't revoke privileges for being a shitty doc even if they want to. The law is written in such a way that the hospital would easily be sued for restraint of trade. I don't like it either, but unless laws get changed, that's what we're stuck with. Well, he had always been a full code. That means that in case of dying, we do everything we can to keep him alive. After a long time of being inpatient, my attending was sick of him and made him a DNR/I, which means let him pass if he starts to struggle. He didn't want this, but they got away with it, saying that he did not have capacity, and he was decently with it, but I can see that argument. So talks with the family started, and they specifically stated that they wanted full code. My attending didn't agree and decided to call them to confirm. But we think he purposefully called the wrong number many times and eventually decided for himself that he was DNR/I. 2 days later, the guy went into RESP distress and died. I came to rounds the next morning to 2 attendings yelling and screaming about the right thing to do. Maybe I feel that it's better that he passed as well. But his family's wishes were ignored and purposefully evaded. I could never go against someone's wishes. This happened a few years ago when I was a third-year med student doing my general surgery clerkship. Right off the bat, I'll say I really couldn't stand the surgeons who ran the rotation. They were egotistical, unprofessional assholes who only cared about how much you kissed up to them. And this went way beyond the usual surgeon stereotype. I had shadowed surgeons in high school and college, always wanted to be one. But this department? Completely dysfunctional on a level I've never seen before or since. I could write a whole book on the insanity that went down there. Anyway, this particular incident started about a month in. By that point, we med students had gotten into the groove. We'd get there around 5:30 a.m., do the morning conference and rounds, spend the day in the OR or clinic, and usually finish around 4 to 6 p.m. if we were lucky. A couple times a week, we had call shifts. Basically, we'd head to the ER after hours and work there until about 11 or midnight. So this one night, I show up at the ER like usual. The attending on call greets me and gives me a rundown. Most of the patients are the usual random stuff: abscesses, minor lacerations, nothing crazy. But then he says we just got an interesting one, a woman in her early 70s, brought in by ambulance, well, actually, a second ambulance. Apparently, she went to her GP complaining of dizziness. The GP didn't want her driving like that, so they called an ambulance to take her to the hospital. On the way, that ambulance got into an accident and flipped. So a second ambulance had to come pick her up and bring her in. Now we're not just dealing with dizziness, we also have to check for internal injuries. She gets a CT, and then is placed in the urgent room in the surgical ER. This is the area reserved for the real serious stuff: stabbings, gunshots, major traumas. She's hooked up to all the monitors, but she's awake, alert, and actually in pretty good spirits. So I go over, introduce myself, tell her I'm the med student on duty tonight, and if she needs anything, just let me know. I'll call her Mrs. X for simplicity. Later on, we get the CT results. Radiology says no internal bleeding or injuries. The attending and the resident both review it, and everything seems fine. The night moves along. I'm mostly helping the resident with the usual gross stuff, cleaning up after draining some anorectal abscesses. For some reason those always showed up when I was on call. Every now and then I check in on Mrs. X, she's doing fine. Around 11 p.m., the attending says it's slow and I can head home. I say goodbye to everyone, tell Mrs. X goodnight, and that I'll see her in the morning. Next day, I show up at 5:30 for the usual morning meeting. But as soon as I walk in, something feels off. Everyone's quiet. Tense. Not even whispering. We're all waiting for the department head to show up. He walks in, sits down at the head of the table without a word. This guy, an older German Jewish surgeon in his 60s, was infamous. Super strict, never smiled, no compliments, always angry looking. Like a walking World War II villain stereotype. Some of the residents had Nazi-themed nicknames for him, which, as a Jewish guy myself, I found ironically hilarious, but that's beside the point. Anyway, he sits there in silence for about 30 seconds. Then he just explodes. Pure rage. Red-faced, yelling so fast and furious it takes us a minute to even understand what happened. Turns out, around 1 or 2 a.m., Mrs. X started deteriorating. She was rushed to the ICU, and by the time of the meeting, she was in a coma with almost no chance of recovering. Why? Because that CT everyone thought was normal? It wasn't. Apparently, she had a very obvious lacerated spleen missed by the radiologist, the attending, and the resident. And to make it worse, the resident had written 24-hour observation in her chart. Sounds okay, right? Except in that setting, you have to specify what you want observed: vitals every X minutes, urine output, anything. But there were no instructions, so everyone assumed someone else was on it, and she got ignored. The department head just kept going, calling the resident incompetent, saying she'd be kicked out of the program, telling the attending he should start looking for a new job. It was brutal. Then, to wrap it all up, he asked what they planned to tell Mrs. X's family. Total silence. Fast forward a couple months. I'm done with surgery, now rotating through a family medicine clinic in the suburbs. This elderly man comes in for something simple, like a cough. The doctor I'm working with, let's call him Dr. Mike, says the guy has an interesting story. Turns out, this man is Mr. X, Mrs. X's husband. He tells me how his wife had dizziness, was sent to the hospital by ambulance, and how the first ambulance crashed. Then how the doctors told him she had internal injuries from that crash and died despite their best efforts. He said he was in the ER with her that night, trying to get someone to check on her, and no one came for hours. He was furious. He was suing the ambulance company, thinking it was their fault. And I just remember feeling this wave of anger come back, knowing what really happened, and how much he'd been lied to. So I told him everything. That I was on call that night. That I spoke with his wife. That multiple doctors missed the diagnosis. That the resident wrote a useless chart note. That she was neglected, and the whole department knew it. That they lied to him. Dr. Mike just looked at me, shocked, but almost grateful. He and I had gotten along really well, shared a similar philosophy on medicine and life. He thanked me for being honest. Mr. X too. And they promised to keep my name out of it because yeah, I was still a med student, and I knew this could blow back on me hard. I had seen another student get expelled the year before for speaking out about shady admin stuff. So yeah, I was scared. But I knew I did the right thing. A couple years later, I heard from Dr. Mike. Mr. X sued the doctors and the department. The hospital settled big time once they realized not only was it a clear case of medical error, but also that the doctors had lied to the family to cover it up. That part made the payout significantly larger. Of course, none of that brings Mrs. X back. And honestly, I wish they had taken it to court and gone after their licenses. But Mr. X did what he had to do to move on. And I'm glad I could at least help make sure those assholes paid something for what they did. That's the most unethical thing I've ever seen a doctor do to a patient. The end. Edit, I may have given the incorrect impression that it was the initial missing of the diagnosis, or the chart error that had made me angry. Mistakes are unfortunate and do happen in the profession. I have made mistakes in my career. It was the handling of the mistake after the fact by outright lying to the patient's family that I found upsetting. People who are making $200,000 plus a year, what do? I read other people's emails and argue about what's in them. Litigation attorney at a big firm. When my friend became a lawyer for some law firm in NYC, he got this really nice apartment. Then he became an in-house counsel or something for a Japanese telecommunication company and now has this awesome house with a big pool in the back and a koi pond in the front, on top of keeping his city apartment in case he has to go back into the city. I made the wrong choices in life. I kid him happy for him and he bursted his ass off for it. And I get to use the city apartment if he's not using it. Airline pilot. About $300K to $350K depending on how much I work. That's after 28 years of airline flying and 16 with the current one. Bachelor's degree and FAA licenses. About 3 years of flying jobs to build hours before first airline job. Initial flying job paid $8 per hour, minimum wage at the time was $5.25, for comparison, first airline job was $17 per hour and I think minimum wage was still the same. You can count on 75 hours per month minimum and about 85 on average. Benefits are good to very good, depending on airline. More time off than regular office jobs, but working weekends and holidays is the norm. You're also away from home a lot. Notice how the doctors don't have the time to even respond on this. Comment, trauma surgeon here winking face. I make $520K. 4 years undergrad, 4 years med school, 5 years surgical residency, 2 years fellowship, and 3 board certifications later. Everything goes up and down, but I love my job right now. However, not sure where the healthcare system will be in the future and scares the crap out of me. My best friend is the manager of a parts supply store. He gets a nice fat salary plus a monthly bonus based on their sales each month. The thing is, the industry we're in and where we live, the salesmen don't have to do shit, the business comes to them. They did $4 million in sales last month and my friend got a $30,000 bonus on top of his salary. He's got that 2 months in a row. On top of clearing $200,000, he has no bills. He uses a company truck, so his insurance and gas is paid for. He doesn't have his own vehicle. Uses a company phone. He splits the rent and groceries with his GF. Ick how much he spends on gambling, weed, and booze, but if he slowed down on that shit he could be a millionaire by 40 easily. Maybe multi-millionaire. Guy loves donating to DraftKings though.
My husband and I are aircraft mechanics, making around $375 to $400 combined with minimal a bit of overtime. Work is tough on the body and mind, but it took us both 18 months of school, cost $10K each, to get our licenses. We get 7.5 weeks paid off a year and will get more as we stay with the company longer.
They ain't teaching. That's all I know.
I'm a clinical psychologist who works primarily as a therapist. My fee is $300 per session, and my sessions last 50 minutes. I have about 15 sessions per week, Half of them take place in an office I sublet and the other half are over Zoom from home. I have very, very low overhead, so it's a very high profit margin. Total dream career.
I'm just gonna say 2 words. Feet pics. Primary care doctor. Make less than almost all of my doctor friends, but still good enough for me. Air doc. 4 to 500K. Most days I try and mop up the mess that is our healthcare system while dealing with very ungrateful, low-functioning, and entitled humans who see me as a gatekeeper. As an air doc, no one will ever say thanks, no one will ever appreciate what you did, and you will always be judged and second-guessed. But you will get to walk away from the hospital with no obligations and the pay/HR is great. You also get to hang out with the absolute best nurses, paramedics, techs, and other docs in the world. I work 12 to 14 days out of a month and generally like my gig. Every once in a while I get to make a meaningful difference in a life. But it's a job filled with emotional trauma and every day I shake my head and wonder how we got here. I'm a union plumber working chemical/industrial construction. 5 years of trade school and countless hours working on my torch skills to stand out from the rest. I do a lot of high-tech and medical work. I make foreman scale, which is about $71 an hour with occasional gangster overtime and then about $37 in benefits, which include full family medical and a solid pension as well. I've already made a little over $85,000 this year, and that's with taking about 2 weeks off. Our household makes $280,000 to $320,000 depending on bonuses, stocks. I make $200K working for big tech. My partner makes $100K working in tech for a non-tech company. For me, I started my career making $50,000 per year, and it took me 6 years and a few job hops acquiring skill/experience to get to $200,000. My partner was in a completely different field and took one of my old jobs as I was quitting. Crypto investor. I put $75,000 into a crypto hedge fund in 2017. I'm currently receiving quarterly distributions of $350,000. That is after taxes. The fun part is that I can donate a boatload to charities to offset my taxes. I'm saving everything. Animals, homeless, the local park, running trails, veterans, disabled, at-risk woman, etc. I took some of that crypto money and invested in a company that is bringing back dinosaurs. Whatever timeline this is, it's fucking nuts. Medical doctor. Spent the best years of my life studying and training, however. My husband makes around $240K, it's more when they win work, which is basically like commission, and as someone who has zero clue about finance or what a managing director for an accounting consulting firm does, he deals with a lot of other people's money, puts it into spreadsheets, makes sure everything is the same color, never gets off the phone, does something called memos, but they are not short little memos, they are long 89-page reports, talks in circles to a bunch of people in China/Japan/Australia at all hours of the day/night because they have zero regard for the fact that his company is in the US, gets yelled at by rich old white dudes who have no boundaries for any hour of the day. Oh, and he says, let's table that for another time, and tie it all up like a million times a day. I'm a speech therapist in an elementary school that works with intense intervention preschool through 6th graders. I'd never survive at his job, lol. I clear about $250,000 as a consultant working for a big player in the oil and gas industry. Easy work, I'm just lucky to have knowledge they'll pay for. I run a food truck. My overhead monthly is about $4,000 and a normal month is $22,000 to $25,000 in profits. Busy months have approached upwards of $34,000 to $37,000. Owner of multiple small businesses here. That's how it's done. Start your own thing. You would be amazed how much people are willing to pay for menial/undesirable tasks to be completed. Edit, for those asking. I won't give specifics of what my service businesses are, but the ideas are not hard to find. Examples, my local Facebook groups are always looking for dryer vent cleaners and handymen, those aren't my niches. I always look into opportunities when presented. Both can clear $100 to $200 an hour easily. I started my, currently, biggest venture out of my own necessity, during the Great Recession of 2008. It was something I already knew how to do, and I quickly realized that I could make more money in a 6-hour day than I could working a full week at my former job. Nowadays, my 2-person crews gross somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a day on average. Of course there's work and expenses on my end, but it is steady, reliable money. A more recent service venture of mine now nets, on average, $200 to $400 an hour. I also own an internet marketing/consulting firm. I sold my first agency a few years ago and started a new one recently. My rate is $1,000 an hour for consultations. I do wish I had more of those hours though, lol. Opportunity has a tendency to look you in the eyes quite often. The trick is changing your mindset to stare it right back at it and act. People who escaped authoritarian governments, when did you know it was the right time for you to leave your country? Not me, but I remember asking my mom why she left the Philippines in the 70s. She explained about the Marcos regime and how he declared martial law. She said when that was announced, she knew she had to leave. She had been working towards moving, anyway, but she said that was her cue to hurry it up. My granddad left Poland after he was thrown in a concentration camp and escaped. He was very clever and bilingual in German. Made it to the UK. He was 16 in 1939. Comment: are you telling me he talked his way out of the Holocaust? Amazing. Answer: him talking was probably the most important aspect of it. He built a relationship with the right person/people. But when I was little, he'd tell me some other stories too. The one I remember best was about a German soldier on the opposite bank of a river they needed to cross. He was either dead already or he killed him. Later on, they came across a river again. His companion was sure it was a different river. However, the dead German soldier was on the same side as him now, and that convinced them they'd just gotten lost. I think the moral of the story wasn't that he was a tough guy, it's that being panicked fucks with your reasoning. The police just started harassing people on the streets after one of the protests in Belarus. Some of them got killed, some injured, thousands were imprisoned and tortured there. It is still happening. Also, I kinda was prepared for that psychologically for a long time before the violence erupted, because it was concealed for years. So when everything happened, I just took the first morning flight and left for another country. This is in 2 words, the story is a bit more complicated, obviously. Edit: wow, I did not expect my story to attract so much interest. I will try to reply to some of the comments. I left for Kiev first, and in a week went to Germany. Migrating through Ukrainian border has been a popular route for many of my countrymen. In many cases, before the war started they crossed the border themselves, as they did not need visa for that. I also already had a Schengen visa, as I was granted a fellowship with German University in March 2020, which was conducted in distant mode because of COVID-19. So the choice of destination was, in a way, a no-brainer. I was granted extension of my fellowship until December. Then I went to Lithuania to work for Tsikhanouskia's office, our elected president. After that, I received an offer from German University and finally settled in Germany. Then I brought my family here as well, which was also a story in itself, as the border was closed when the Belarusian regime forcefully landed the plane with Pratasevich. When I went to the market and found nothing at all but bones. When I was pointed at with a gun to my face to be robbed for the umpteenth time. When one of my neighbors got shot, hearing his relatives screaming. When kids died around me in protests. When we got tear-gassed and shot at by the National Guards. When the dictator was dancing salsa in mandatory national transmission while he celebrated the death of protesters. I left Venezuela in 2016 and it still fucking hurts. When they arrested members of the opposition party for holding a primary. When police stormed and shut down headquarters of the only newspaper still critical of the government. When non-violent protesters were given longer sentences than violent convicts for having posters in their backpacks. When the heads of government were one by one replaced by toads with neither qualifications nor experience, purely based on their ass-kissing rhetoric. When they start passing legislation that you know will hurt people, and they don't care. when an extra panel of judges were suddenly appointed above the Supreme Court, with final decision on interpreting the law. When caring about it makes you lose sleep and starts to affect your work quality. It was never one thing, but you just see it getting worse and worse step by step, and you make a judgment call. The timing and reasons will be different between all your friends and family. My grandfather, the bravest man I have ever known, fled Germany shortly before the Nuremberg laws were passed in late 1935. He had been a lawyer and had arranged everyone's passports, hidden some gold away, and established a place for them to flee. The judiciary was already under control of the regime. He took his wife and 5 children and crossed France into Belgium, and by 1936 he was applying for asylum to multiple countries, including the US, where he knew people in the embassy. He was summarily denied. As they began invading Belgium in May of 1940, the family fled along the coast on foot, separating children and adults so as not to all be traveling together, hoping their odds were better. My grandmother and my 2 aunts were caught a few days into the trip and sent to the gas chambers at Treblinka. The eldest son, Mikhail, was caught foraging food by the Gestapo in southern France and summarily executed on the spot. My father, who was 9, his younger brother Joseph, and my grandfather fled into northern Spain and were hidden by the remnants of the Zamoristas in Catalonia. Joseph developed pneumonia and died somewhere in northern Spain. My grandfather and father were smuggled into Portugal, onto a boat, and eventually made it to New Palestine. After the war, my grandfather had had enough of the Zionists, and he was finally granted a U.S. immigration visa and came here in 1947. I was born on American soil in 1961. I grew up hearing the stories. We left Poland after a drunk cop crashed into the fire truck my dad was responding in to a fire. The cop and his friends tried to get my dad to take the blame. They'd harass him, even started turning up to my grandmother's house with warnings that unless he took the blame, things would get worse. My granddad was still alive at the time and he told my folks to leave as the police wouldn't stop. My parents ended up leaving for Germany first, then both the kids ended up settling in Australia and haven't really looked back. I was born in USSR, watched it collapsed when I was 7. Getting out for me was never a question when it's right but when I'm able. By the time I was 21 I was legally orphaned, graduated cum laude from the best college in the country, but my English wasn't good enough to qualify for international graduate school program. I spent another year in a local graduate program while paying to a lab colleague to teach me English after hours. Nobody believed I will go through with my intention to enroll into grad program in Ohio State University. Russia at the time was at peak economic growth. The government was pumping so much money into science and technology that former USSR expatriates were coming back from US under the promises to be local science superstars. It never fooled me. It was very clear that those programs were purely for decorum and the processes were not meant to be fair or merit-based. Everybody was telling me what a fool I was to leave clean and beautiful Moscow metropolis for Midwest. I landed in Columbus, Ohio in 2006 with $300, never came back. 15 years later, when the first bombs were dropped on Ukraine, panic settled in. My friends abandoned their businesses, properties and families to get out. My cousin, a male of military age, stayed until the conscription was announced. Due to geographical luck, our town is a few dozen miles from the border. He managed to get a last-minute train ticket and crossed the border to Kazakhstan 3 years ago. Did I foresee the catastrophic relapse into militarized autocracy when I left 2006? No. Upper mobility and economic opportunities in Russia were the best it's ever been in 2006, but it still remained unreachable for 95% of population, myself included. I took no joy in my decision. It was made out of desperation, and if I knew the struggles awaiting me I doubt I'd have the courage. Imagine how it felt on November 6, 2024, after spending 2 decades getting the coveted US passport, to wake up in the second iteration of Trump country. You think the catastrophic collapse can't happen here? Erosion of civility happens slowly, but the system is crumbling in front of you and way too many people are oblivious to what they are witnessing. 8. Canadian here. I left the US to go back to Canada in 2013 because of the political climate. I lived in Ohio for most of my childhood. When Trump got in the first time, that was confirmation that I made the right call and got out in time. Things have gotten steadily scarier since then, and I am fearful for all my gay and trans siblings who are still south of the border, especially those in red states like Texas, Florida, or Ohio. If Canada follows the US down this authoritarian path and votes in the Conservatives, I don't know where I will be able to go to find safety. Ontario is already hostile enough to trans people as is. This was not me but my mom, right when the Iran-Iraq war ended. The very first day the border restrictions were lifted, my mom hopped on a bus with one bag from Baghdad to Jordan and never went back. It was very hard for her because she never thought she would ever leave, but her whole family was leaving one by one, all heading in different directions when they got the chance. She didn't want to admit it, but she wished she left sooner. Everything from all sectors was deteriorating, from education to city upkeep. The population of certain villages were disappearing without a trace, genocide. She even had a really bad gut feeling that something much worse was going to happen to Iraq, and every sign told her to leave. Her gut feeling ended up right. Even my dad's side realized too. My family is Christian and there are no minority rights in Iraq at the time and even now. In the early 2000s, I forgot the year, 2 of my uncles were kidnapped and brought to mosque and were given 1 week to pack up and leave because they were Christian. The only reason why they didn't kill them was because they saw they had kids, so they spared them. They left as fast as they could and went to Syria. Then boom, the civil war starts and had to leave soon after that, starting a new life in Canada. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below what you thought about these stories. What would you do in their situation? Here are some other videos I highly recommend, and don't forget you'll find a wide variety of them on my channel. See you next time.